That I got lights.
We're live.
We're live.
I saw your message that. Hello and welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I'm Brandon Tessers.
I'm Caitlin Miller.
We are both licensed therapists, but this is very much not therapy for very, very, very many reasons.
So many reasons.
Usually we are joined by Marie Moran to host. Unfortunately, Marie is not feeling well today, so it's just the two of us. We work at a practice called Effective Artistry. It's a therapy and executive functioning coaching practice specialized in neurodiversity, executive functioning issues, but really just awesome because we're so great.
It's the coolest place.
We're in Illinois, so we do individual, couples, family, group therapy with people in the state of Illinois, hoping to expand that sooner than later. Executive functioning coaching can be done with people all over the world.
Anywhere where there is an internet connection.
Yeah.
You could be in the middle of the ocean, and if you have an internet connection, you can do executive functioning coaching.
Yeah, it's true. It is true. That
It is
probably
true.
works these days.
You
with
could
satellite
be,
internet.
yeah, you could be on a cruise ship.
Yeah. What am I? What do we say?
Anywhere, blah blah blah.
This is just an open conversation, which can be questions. Those of you who are here, we're glad to have you here. If you are comfortable joining in the chat, we love that because we just have to kind of guess and imagine who you might be and what you might be interested in, unless you're in the chat, and then you can kind of tell us things about what you're interested in. It's just a conversation. The things that we say impact one another, impact you. The things that you say will impact us. We go where we go. I would still say like we usually pick a topic, even though we don't usually pick a topic anymore. At least it's been several weeks since we picked the topic in advance.
Yeah.
But
I feel like that might be a good thing to reinstate at some point.
Sure. It's important to note, I think, that no matter what we're talking about, whatever Caitlin and I are discussing, we can always, we'll go wherever. You who are here in the chat, whatever you post takes our priority. You don't have to like keep it on theme with what we're already talking about.
Absolutely.
I think that's mostly enough. Okay. Anyway, how are you?
I'm enjoying all the lights.
Yeah, they put up a lot of lights in the trees. You know, it just occurred to me that without Marie here, I can't be positive that our sound is working. If there's anyone here in the chat, will you let us know if the sound is working properly? I want to make sure that it looks like it's going okay.
It looks like we can hear you.
As you may be able to tell,
Twitchy is something?
Twitchy is glitchy. It's working. Awesome. Thank you.
That's so funny. Twitchy is glitchy. I wonder where you get your propensity for language from.
What was it? I'm sorry that Twitch is glitchy. You can try on Facebook or YouTube. Oh, I was saying that.
I thought YouTube was just upload. We're live on YouTube too?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
We're live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. And then it's available as a video on demand afterwards on each of those platforms also.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Those of you who, let's talk about appropriate Christmas gifts for Dad. It's a good idea, Dad.
It really depends on the dad, and what do you mean by appropriate?
Well, my dad, it's going to be either a Lamborghini or a Ferrari. Is what he's been asking for since I was 12 years old.
I don't know. Maybe in a few years. Who knows?
I hate to break it to you, Dad. Even if I could afford it,
I wouldn't do
I think it's so wasteful to
Gonna
spend
be
that
a-
amount of money on a car.
Yeah, maybe a college fund for the kids or something. I don't know.
Even if I spent that much on your gift, just a car is so wasteful. Anyway, I'm in the middle of changing my office around. We're in a bit of a different layout. That's why I was concerned about the audio. And it's kind of still, you can see some pictures hanging on the floor, sitting on the floor behind us. Still
It's
in
actually
process.
the new In Vogue thing is to put
Yeah.
on the floor. I actually did that once.
Yeah.
But not in front of a chest with drawers.
Yeah. So what's on your mind?
I'm saying the lights. What's on your mind?
Well, two of my kids are sick, but one more so than the other, and we got terrible sleep last night. We were basically trading off like being awake for 2 hours and sleeping for 2 hours at a time. And Susan, my wife, just called right before this to talk about our middle son who's coughing a ton. So that's what's on my mind in the moment. But over the past week, I've been thinking a lot about certainly like gratitude and things like that around Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
But also I've been thinking a lot about, I don't know, call it people pleasing or social sensitivity or whatever.
Do you have any new Brandon thoughts around social sensitivity and people pleasing?
Sure.
What are your new Brandon thoughts?
I don't know. I don't know what, because I was thinking, as most of the time when I'm thinking about stuff, I'm thinking about it through the lens of what's relevant to me, like what's happening in my life or to the people I interact with, whether that's my family and friends or clients or whatever. And we were visiting some friends over the holiday. We were staying with our good friends who live in Des Moines, Lizzie and Ross. Ross has been on the stream once a while back. He did it with me.
This isn't UK Ross, right?
No. Okay. This is my friend Ross that drew that picture up there.
Oh my gosh, that means he's super cool.
He is super cool.
Oh, wow.
Lizzie is also super cool, and their son Ollie, their 4-year-old Ollie, is super cool.
Augie and Ollie.
Yeah, and they're very close in age. Ollie's like 5 months younger.
Aww.
But just.
Did you bring your kids there too?
Oh yeah, all of us together. And there's a lot of interesting stuff happening with just travel generally, and what happens to attentional processes during and after traveling. But anyway, Ross and Lizzie are a lot like myself and Susan and you, and a lot of the, that they're very focused on trying to make sure that they're doing what people need from them or want, like trying to we're all trying to make each other happy all the time.
Like overbalanced? Out of balance?
It's not that it's out of balance per se. It's not even a problematic thing necessarily. It's often very like beneficial and helpful thing. It's people generally like you, right?
Yeah, but it's interesting the sort of pinball machine of, oh, well, I did this because I thought it would make you happy. Well, I responded this way because I thought that would make you happy. And then all of a sudden you're like doing something no one wants to do and you're not happy doing it at all.
That I call that the gift of the Magi stuff, where like each person is trying to give something to the other person that they think the other person wants, but in trying to do that, it happens.
And sometimes it can get really extreme too.
Honestly, with Susan and myself, and I assume just generally with couples who are both very sensitive to social data and whose relationships are not like, because all relationships have conflict, right? But not all conflict is about like actual mutually exclusive things. A lot of times conflict is just communication based. And a lot of the time it comes down to that, right? Like when you're trying to guess what somebody else wants and give it to them, and then it turns out that they didn't want it. Either they don't care and therefore didn't notice, or it's actually actively the opposite of what they want. It makes things harder or worse for them. Then there's a tendency to get resentful and be like, well, I did this nice thing. I put all this effort into making you happy and it didn't work. Because it makes you feel bad.
Yeah.
About yourself first.
And then I think those conversations often go to some version of, oh, well, I did, maybe not with you and Susan, but like the average couple, like, oh, I did this thing. And
yeah, certainly.
then it's like a trade-off between,
But to me, that's an issue of communication, not about social sensitivity or whatever.
Okay, so where does social sensitivity come in?
Well, social sensitivity comes in with trying to guess. Like what I'm saying with it's not out of balance or whatever, it's just that you want communication to kind of correlate to how sensitive you are. Like to care very much and pay a lot of attention and put a lot of thought into what someone else wants or how they're feeling or whatever is not inherently a bad thing. But when you're not communicating with that person, then it gets into a lot of like thinking and ruminating.
So then essentially some version of, I care a lot about making you happy. What can I do to make you happy?
Yes, sure. although even that, our, Andy, that you and I both worked for, that we met, had a saying of relationships require equal exchange of energy in order to be like sustainable long term.
Yeah, totally.
Which I do agree with. If one person is saying, I care a lot about making you happy, what can I do, over and over, it actually makes it worse for both people.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking of it as like a once in a while sort of thing to say. Can you say more about how it's less helpful? Or how it can make it worse for
what
both
actually
people?
is most helpful is to tell the other person what you want.
Oh, yes.
Because when you do that,
yeah.
you give them the opportunity to like help you or give you what you want,
Yeah.
and they feel good about that. It also then allows them, puts them in a position where they feel as though they can tell you what they want, both because obviously you're okay doing it, saying what you want, which means that you don't judge people for doing it, but also because, there's always that calculation of how much have I gotten, how much have I given to some extent. It's not a healthy or unhealthy thing. It's just a thing that happens. Call it appropriate or whatever word you want to use. We're always kind of doing that calculation of like, what is okay to ask for? And the more that we're doing that with one another, the more that it becomes reciprocal. And then neither of us is having to guess all the time about what other people want.
Yeah.
And so,
how did that apply to your friends?
Well, just when there's 4 kids around, that, and Thanksgiving dinner being made, it just, life is busy and it's hectic and we don't get to sit down and talk the way that we used to. And so we don't get to communicate as much. So I worry that I was a bad house guest, or I worry that I wasn't fun enough. And I know that they're also worrying that they didn't make the trip fun enough. We're all exhausted. We're not traveling with young kids is hard. We're all tired, and they're lovely people, and Susan and I are lovely people, and we all love each other and get along. And that's the thing, is that when we get real tired, it tends to manifest more as like, oh no, I think I've done a terrible job of making other people happy, rather than like, oh, these people are jerks, because they're not. I couldn't think of them that way.
Is there a sense of loss of like that the relationship based off of the environment used to exist in a way that was maybe more pleasing?
No, I mean, well, I suppose in the sense like you and I were talking about beforehand about like, certainly there's plenty of times where I'm like, oh man, when I was young and single and didn't have kids, I had so much time and so much energy to just do whatever I felt like doing. But of course, I was also lonely and like looking forward to having the things that I have now. And so it's not a sense of loss. And it's not even a thing I think is, I feel silly about it.
Whoa.
Like that to sit and ruminate about, oh, have I upset them? Have I been a bad house guest? Especially when I know that they are likely doing, like, oh, have we been a good enough host or whatever. To be in my head about that is unnecessary and unhelpful for me and for them.
Is there an element of shame in silly?
I wouldn't say so, but maybe depending on how other people would use that word, maybe. It's more just, I recognize it for what it is, which is a sign of my exhaustion. That when I am rested and energized and balanced and whatever, I don't think and feel that way. But as I get more tired, I start to slip more into ruminating and getting in my head, which just then other people read me being in my head and they're like, oh no, is he in his head because I'm doing something? I'm thinking, oh no, are they in their head because I'm doing, it just makes it worse for everybody. Not having clear communication can lead to overthinking. Better to just ask for clarity. Yeah, that's what we're saying. It's not, again, you can't like actually say everything you're thinking and wanting all the time. But the more of it you do, the less the other person has to guess. And one of the things that people will talk about, and they'll use different terms for this depending on the relationships and the patterns. One of the things people will talk about in a lot of different ways when it comes to whether they call it mental health or relationships or whatever, is this pattern of, I thought things were fine, and then all of a sudden there's a blow up. Which what's happening there is that one person is upset about something, annoyed, frustrated, guilty, whatever, some negative emotional experience, and doesn't say anything about it for whatever reason. Maybe they don't want to be a burden. Maybe they think it's silly. Maybe they think the other person won't like it, whatever.
Mhm.
And it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds until it gets to the point where it's so bad, whatever the feeling is, anger, annoyance, guilt, whatever, that you can no longer hold back on expressing it, and it just comes out. But then when it comes out, it's really bad, and you've been making an active effort to hide it from the other person that whole time. So it will often be, people will be like, it is impossible to predict this person, right? Like, I think everything's fine, and then all of a sudden it's like, you've been doing X, Y, and Z for 3 days, and blah, blah, blah.
So do you think those people, not that this is like, I'm not trying to assume fault or something, but some version of communicating their needs sooner before it gets to a place where they're holding it in for so long that they blow up?
Yes. And it's not every time that you don't say something negative does it like grow and grow and eventually blow up. There's kind of that pop psychology concept of you can't hold it in or it'll erupt, and that's not how it works. It does happen that way sometimes, but it doesn't inevitably happen that way. It is okay to just say, you know what, I don't need to address this, I just need to move on from it. And then if you know what to do or are able to do things, that then you can move on from it, great. But if you can't, if you're just sitting there in your head feeling trapped, then it will probably get worse and worse the longer you're thinking about it. And then by the time it comes out, it's really bad.
I've noticed for some people that if they don't ask for what they want often and then they finally do, that if that request goes unmet, then it's like much higher stakes, because it's some version of, oh, I only ask for what I want when I really, really need it, and I only do it a couple times a year, and why couldn't they just do it? And then sometimes I think that reinforces the cycle of, oh, well, if they're not going to do the couple of things I effing ask them to do once in a while, then I'm not going to ask for anything because they just won't do anything. And then I don't know. What do you think, Brandon Tussers?
I agree. I think of this as the most common, like what I was referring to as the gift of the Magi, which, just if no one knows, if someone doesn't know that reference, it's an old short story about a couple, a man and a woman, who are trying to get each other things for Christmas. And the woman has this beautiful long hair that's her like most treasured like feature of herself, and the man has this great pocket watch that's his most valued possession.
Remember this story now.
And for Christmas, he wants to buy her this beautiful comb for her hair, and he wants to do it so badly that he sells his pocket watch in order to be able to afford it. And she decides to buy him a chain for his pocket watch, and she cuts and sells all her hair in order to be able to afford it. So they give each other gifts that are no longer useful because each of them gave up the thing that they valued most for each other. And it's very tragic and sad.
It is so sad.
Even though, like in this scheme of things, it's not that tragic. But there's this kind of, I think it's very resonant. It sticks with people because of this, because there's so much where we try and guess. And so, yes, I think the most common version of that we're talking about is, I don't want to burden somebody.
Well, and there's also a level of gift of the Magi of like martyrdom. Like, I love this person so much that I'm going to give up the thing that brings me the most pleasure or joy or value so I can prove that I love them so much or something.
Yeah, no, that definitely, where you're guessing about something that they would want, and then you make some effort or sacrifice. You do something you wouldn't otherwise do.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's very difficult or painful or whatever, but sometimes it's just, you're going out of your way, but it's not a terrible thing or whatever.
Yeah.
But and then if they don't appreciate it the way you thought they would, that will often turn into resentment and anger. But the one you were talking about, I think, is even more common, where I don't want to burden people, so I don't ask them, I don't tell them what I want, because if I do, that means they have to give it to me. Because if you are a person who feels as though if someone else wants something from you, you have to give it to them, then you're likely to think that other people feel the same. That if you tell them
that it's like a sign of a healthy relationship or love, that it's some version of, when someone asks me for something, I have to do it, because if I don't love them, or I'm not showing that I love them or care for them.
I think it gets thought of that way, absolutely. I think at the root of it, though, it's just a fear of, if I don't give them what they want,
agree.
They'll dislike me and they'll leave me. That I have to constantly keep providing value to them because I haven't banked any value with them, basically. So that's why, again, you can call these things fear of abandonment. You could call it, depending on the person and the patterns and the relationships, you can call it bipolar or borderline personality disorder
Yeah.
or histrionic personality disorder or
Socio-
lots of different things.
Antisocial personality disorder.
There's a lot of work and focus on children whose parents were emotionally unpredictable to them and what happens to those people. What we're talking about is social sensitivity.
Yeah.
One of the ways that theoretically a person would become like that would be because they have parents that had difficulty predicting or reading them emotionally and getting
And I'm
surprised.
guessing you're insinuating that there are other places that can come from, if it even comes from that.
I mean, effectively, it's just like we were talking about last week. I think any type of data that some problem happens and you have any reason to believe, had I noticed this beforehand, I would have been able to prevent or avoid the problem. So anything that happens where you're like, if I had read these people better, if I had understood and predicted their feelings better.
Yeah.
It's just that parents are the most impactful for children, generally speaking. So it's a very common way to look at it, I guess. Anyway. Yeah, if you feel like you're a burden by telling somebody what you want, then yeah, one of the ways that'll go is, well, so I don't ever tell anybody what I want, but I still want it. And then in my head, I'll just work on like, is it okay for me to want it? Is it okay for me to ask for it? Is it appropriate? And sometimes I'll come up with, no, I shouldn't say anything else. But sometimes I'll work through it and say, yeah, no, this is not only appropriate, it's actually necessary. It's something that I actually need, and I can justify it and prove it that I need it, and they really need to give it to me. And then you ask. And then, yes, the stakes are so high. If they say no at that point, then, well, you've done this whole thing where, like, if they love you, they have to do this thing.
And I guess another thought I have about it is if you ask sooner where you identify it's a need you want to have met, I don't know how to speak, that you can then ask other members of your community if the person you initially ask says no.
Right.
So I feel like there are so many positives.
If you only ask when you need it, then by the time you ask for anything, you are desperate.
Pretty desperate, yeah.
And this is a silly metaphor, but it's kind of like if I were to say, like, I'm a little thirsty, would you mind bringing me a glass of water? And you're to say, oh no, I'm busy right now, I'm sorry. If I like just got a little thirsty, it's not a big deal. But if I get a little thirsty and think about asking you and don't, and think about asking you and don't, and then 3 days later and I'm like dying from a lack of water, and at that point I say, can you bring me water? I'm about to die. And you think I'm just being, exaggerating or whatever, or you're busy or whatever, and you say, sorry, not right now. And at that point it's like, all I'm asking for is for you to just walk and give me a glass of water to save my life. Like, you don't even care enough about my life to walk over and get me some water.
And also sometimes the person on the receiving end of that can be like, why are you so dramatic? And why are you so, why do you only ask when you're about to die? And why does your life suck this much? And then I felt obligated to get you a glass of water because you were freaking out so much, but I actually resent you.
Because you get so angry at me if I say no. Like, I'm not allowed to. So then you reinforce, like you said, that reinforces the thing of like, okay, well, people do respond as though me asking them for something is an obligation that they have to do. So now
I think that goes into some of the isolation you talk about, I think in society in general, but also with neurodivergent people, where it's some version of, I need to solve all my problems on my own.
Yeah.
And then they're trying to solve problems that aren't solvable on your own.
Yep. There's a couple comments here. Vast Insider. I'm usually pretty decent at communicating, but I had the weird experience when staying with my sister where I just could not think of how to explain things and really didn't think she would understand. So I just kind of shut down and couldn't communicate. Yep. That's a pretty common one. I mean, again, especially for neurodivergent people, but certainly not exclusive to neurodivergent people.
I have some clients talking about that now too during the holidays. Like, I'm going to be staying with my family for 7 days and they always do this one thing and I don't know how to communicate because it seems so stuck and I've tried in the past and it didn't work and it still doesn't work, and like those kind of entrenched.
It's always people getting, they're in their head predicting whether or not the other person, it's not actually about, well, I was going to say it's not actually about understanding, which it kind of is, because the way that you would know that they understand is that they would do or, give you what you're asking, modify whatever they're doing. Like,
well, couldn't it also be that they kind of repeat it back to you and say something like, that's a valid need, I just can't meet that right now?
Yeah. But usually when we're talking about like
If it's that bad.
traveling and hanging out with family and stuff, like
Yeah.
you were the example, usually we're talking about it something that they're doing or that's something that doesn't work for me and I need to be changed.
Mm-hmm.
And because a lot of the time, like we were just talking about, the understanding piece of it is, no, if they really understood it, then they would give it to me.
Because it's so obvious and they're capable of doing
Well,
it
because
to
it's
me.
necessary, right? By the time you think of it, like I wouldn't ask for this except that I need it. And so if they say back the words to me and then still say no, then they obviously don't understand how this works for me.
Oh, that's so sad.
Which is a very neurodivergent or very common neurodivergent thing, is like, if people understood how difficult this was for me, if they understood, no, it's not just I don't like it or it's hard, it's I can't, stuff like that. But it is.
So is that a similar thing where asking sooner, so even if someone says no, you can ask other people, or it changes the nature of the relationship and you don't rely upon them as much or whatever?
Yeah, or you can make other accommodations, including up to even just not going and being able to communicate with one another and saying like, I love you and I'd like to be with you and I can't handle this thing and you're saying you can't change it, so we're just not going to be together this time. And it doesn't mean we don't love each other, we just, that particular
thing there was
work.
some this person was very sort of binary, so I'm not recommending them, but there was some person with like a new famous book on boundaries, and she was talking about that, like checking in with people ahead of time and asking for what you need, and then if they say no and it feels like the stakes are too high, just not going.
Yeah. Because that's the thing, nobody who cares about you and loves you wants you to be miserable.
Yeah.
And if the price of having you at their event or being able to spend time with you is that you're miserable, that's not enjoyable.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing that I think gets lost in a lot of this. My dad made the comment, I don't think martyrs can be true lovers. One cannot love another more than they love themselves, else how will they know what that love looks like? And I think there's truth to that. I mean, that's written in a very like poetic kind of a way. But I think there's, if you love somebody, care about somebody, like we don't have to make it a love thing. If
Let's
someone
not
else,
use the L word.
Well, I mean, we can. It's just that brings up, like, for a lot of people, it's a binary: you love or don't love.
Yeah, no, I like the word care on the stream for this context.
Yeah, if you care about someone, or even better, if someone's experience or thoughts or whatever matters to you, because sometimes, like, you might have a boss that you hate and don't care about, like, making him happy, except that his opinion of you matters or her opinion of you matters.
Yeah.
So whenever there's somebody whose emotional experience and perception of you matters to you, then you want them to be happier. Which means that the happier they are, the happier you are. So we'll take it away again.
No, I was just thinking there's like some kid song that I used to sing about like the happier together, blah blah blah, the happier we'll be.
Happier together.
Yep, there we go.
Happier we'll be.
Yeah, there's something about then my friend and your friend and da, 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 da.
I mean,
I realized the other day, Brandon, this is a side, but that I'm very good at remembering melodies, but surprise, surprise, it's very hard for me to remember words.
Well, that's so interesting, and I would love to talk about that.
Yeah.
So my thoughts on the, like, you can't be a martyr and be a true, love or whatever. It's just, if making yourself unhappy or miserable or whatever is how you feel as though you are demonstrating love, right? Like that if I love this person, it means that I make sacrifices for them and I do difficult things. Well, that person, if they also care about you, wants you to be happy too. And if you are not, if you're miserable, then they are more miserable than they otherwise would have been. It is possible to still be happy when someone you love is miserable, but you can't be as happy as you would otherwise be if you're aware of them being miserable.
Yeah.
And even more than that, think about, not only are they seeing that you're miserable and they would rather that you be happy, but they're getting a sense that they are the cause of some of your misery. That because of them and the things that they like, the things that you are doing on their behalf or for them is making you miserable. Think about you. If someone you love or care about is making sacrifices for you, making themselves sad and miserable to do things for you, to give you things that you want, do you like that?
Are you asking that? Of course not.
Yeah. I mean,
and sometimes I can think of one person in particular this happens, like I would say once in a while with, and then usually that incentivizes me, my gut reaction. I don't do this anymore, but some version of I'm just going to stop asking them for things because they're sacrificing themselves so much that I'm just going to say, I'm okay.
Yeah. And we're right back. This is another entry point into that same cycle.
Yeah.
Anything that, and there's lots of different ways to get there, but anything that ends up with, I should communicate less, I should tell this person less, is always going to be bad for the relationship, period.
Yeah, I would say the exception, which I know you're not saying this, is in relationships that cause a lot of pain, that's a way to kind of step away from it.
Well, sure, if you want the relationship to get more tenuous or stop. I mean, very literally, if you want a relationship to diminish in your life or no longer be a part, you just communicate and interact with that person less or not at all. That's what a relationship is, how much you interact and communicate with the other person.
Yeah.
If you want the relationship to be better and stronger, you do more of it. If you want it to be weaker, you do less of it. There is no version of, I will make this relationship stronger by communicating less.
Yeah.
But me included, some of us, everyone has their predispositions, right? Like when you experience enough distress, you'll do something. And different people, their behaviors are different for whatever reason. Some of us, a very common, like my predisposition, one of my predispositions is to think that everyone's mad at me or upset with me. The more tired I get, I mean, you know this.
I know it
well
so
personally,
well. It just makes me sad.
Yeah. The more tired you get, the more whatever you get, the more you worry. Nobody thinks I'm valuable, or they take me for granted, or because it can go different ways. It can go the way of like, no, they're right, and I am a piece of crap, or it can go the way of, no, they all think I suck and they're wrong and they're jerks, and I get really angry. You can feel really guilty or really angry, and one can flip to the other real fast.
Yeah.
Usually, the feeling bad about yourself flips to feeling bad towards others. It doesn't often flip the other.
Yeah.
You don't often go from being like, those people suck, to being like, no, I'm the bad one. But you can only feel so bad about yourself. You can only do so much like, I'm terrible and I've caused a bunch of problems. But sooner or later, it will flip to like, no, it's unreasonable for them to be upset about this thing. Again, they might not even be upset.
I feel like there are some cases in my life that I've never flipped to the second. It's just like a perpetual self-blaming.
Because you will, I mean, these are human limits. It's kind of like saying like, there are times in my life where I never slept. Like,
well, I guess for me it would be like, it was my fault, case closed. I'm going to compartmentalize this and never think about it again.
Well, then you're not feeling bad.
Oh, okay. So there's some resolution.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can come to a conclusion of like, I was in the wrong. There's a lot of good and helpful things that can come from thinking that way. It's the feeling bad part that you can only do so much.
Yeah. I was thinking about, I had this image of, I think when I entered kindergarten, that I think I was very rambunctious and I talked a lot and I was like all like kind of spacey and blah blah blah. And my first report card said something about like Caitlin is very bad, like poorly behaved. And guess what happened after that? I essentially never misbehaved for the rest of my school career. And I remember reading that and being like, and I remember very few things in my life, but that feeling of I am a burden, I messed up, like I'm bad.
In ways that I didn't know and nobody told me at the time.
Yeah.
Because those two things are really key for some of this, I think. That
Yeah.
like other people were aware or were feeling badly about what I was doing, but didn't tell me until much later.
Yeah, and I think the idea of like a mid-year report card thinking, oh my gosh, the teacher thought of me as this awful thing for so long. And now I'm just finding out.
If you could find that report card.
I actually might. My mom said she wants me to get rid of stuff.
You should take a look for it because I would be so curious to know what was actually stated.
I think it was something about talking too much.
But see how you phrased it earlier is like it said something about Caitlin is bad, and then you reframed it to Caitlin is, behaving
Well, I think
poorly.
part of the feedback was some version of she needs to stop doing this.
Right, but she talks out of turn is a very different thing than she's bad.
Yeah, I think something about being distracted. And so I think about like autistic or ADHD or neurodivergent, whatever, femme presenting people versus like male presenting, and sort of that feeling of you have to behave. Like you have to take all of that energy, swallow it, sit. Like even like ballet class, a string of pearls is your spine, all of those things.
Yes.
Not that it's that binary, but I just
No, it's
I don't
certainly
know.
not binary.
Yeah.
Because obviously there are masculine presenting people who experience. I think
I'm biased based off of my like non-binary or femme presenting clients who talk about that sort of mechanism a lot.
Yeah, I don't think it's equally
Yeah.
distributed by any means.
Yeah.
But I think really what it is that it correlates with other things, and those things are also things which happen more frequently for femme presenting or female identified people. So that it's not exclusively about being identified as a woman.
Yeah.
But it is stuff that happens way more frequently and constantly and intensely, statistically speaking, broadly speaking, for femme presenting people. I think it has a lot to do with people paying attention to you when you don't know that they are and aren't inviting or trying to get their attention.
Oh.
Which does for some similar and some other reasons happen more for feminine presenting people in our culture. Good.
Can you tell me how I got from that to what you were talking about? Because there was some connection, but now I'm not able to track it.
I think you were talking about like how hard you took that little comment.
Oh, and
how
similar
you modified
to
everything.
Yeah. So was that similar to the needs conversation?
Needs
What is
conversation?
Coach? Never mind. What's Coach Fritz saying? I can't read.
He says he used to tell people who said, I'm taking care of my kids right now. When I'm done with that, I'll take care of myself. He would encourage them to take care of themselves and that they'd be able to take care of their kids even better. He says that's the thinking that leads to self-harm or suicide. And I mean, there's certainly commonly truth to that.
I was thinking with his martyrdom comment that I've noticed in clients that eventually they hit a wall and something changes, and sometimes that's their bodies shutting down.
Another reason I think there are certain physical ailments that correlate with feminine presenting and people who are socialized as women people, because I know it was a silly metaphor, but the drink of water thing, right? Like if I never ask for a drink of water and tell I'm about to die of thirst, that's going to like cause some physical issues that didn't necessarily need to have happened or hypothetically might not have happened had I been drinking water more frequently, right? Like,
I've had clients say something like having a trauma to their physical body in, let's say, middle school, and then some version of I've been hating my body or separate from my body ever since. And at the age of usually it's mid-20s to early 40s, everything just shuts down. And I know that's technically a story and it's a little insight oriented or whatever, but it's just interesting how people track it.
I hear that stuff a lot, and that's what I tend to talk about through the lens of deprioritized interoception. That certainly can be related to traumatic events or experiences, but doesn't necessarily have to be.
Oh yeah, it doesn't have to
that
be.
Like you just don't pay very much attention. It's also not like obviously the specifics are different for each person, but you'd be hard pressed to find anybody who's 40 who wouldn't say something like, yeah, I used to not really think about what my body needed at all because I could do whatever and it wasn't a problem, but now I have to think about it a lot.
I guess I was thinking in particular about a client who shut down so much that they were like unemployed for a year and a half and just laying in bed, like that level of sort of, what did you say, deprioritized interoception?
Yes, although in that case, well, I don't know the specifics, but generally that has other stuff involved.
Yeah.
Especially if it's persisting for that long. That because what could happen with a lack of awareness of your body and its needs, right, is that you push and you push and you push to the point where all of a sudden you can't function, like you can't get out of bed, and that's the first time you notice anything wrong. That absolutely can happen. But once that happens, like eventually it gets bad enough that you do notice it and you're like, I cannot get out of bed. And at that point, all of a sudden what mostly then happens is that you become very aware of your body and its state and what it needs. With theoretically the intention, the point of that would be that then you start addressing and giving the body what it needs, resting more and whatever. So if it's persisting for a year and a half, then either there are some like longer term medical issue that like by the time that it first kicked in, or by the time that awareness came around, there was damage done to the body that was like beyond the ability to repair without like some kind of external intervention.
And I was thinking of that as the metaphor of waiting to ask for a glass of water until you're almost dying of thirst.
Yeah.
That there could theoretically be systems in the body that would have broken down before asking for the final.
Well, yes, but systems in the body like breaking down is not a binary thing, right? Yeah. So it just means what would need to be done to repair it. And not that it could necessarily certainly it can't always get back to the initial level of functionality. But there's no damage that cannot be undone to some extent through stuff like that. If that makes sense. Like there's injuries and illnesses and whatever that cause damage that can't be repaired.
Yeah.
But damage that's caused by not eating enough and not sleeping enough and whatever, that you can't always repair all of that damage.
Yeah.
And then you're also talking about like, well, how much is it different because now you're 10 years older than you were when it started?
Did you say that on the last stream?
I think we were talking some about this because I think this plays a lot into. Here's something I've been thinking about recently. You know how millennials generally, with Gen Xers as well, and even younger people, Gen Z and beyond, will say like, I don't feel like an adult. Like I still feel like I'm a kid. I'm
very common.
I'm 38, and I still feel like I'm messing up all the time. I'm like successful.
Are you being Brandon right now?
I am.
Oh, okay. So I'm like, I think you're 30.
Susan yesterday to me said like, when am I going to stop like thinking I need people's permission to do the things that I think are good ideas to do? Like I'm almost 40. Why can't I not? It's something we're both working. So I think part of what's contained in that, people saying like, I feel like I'm not an adult, is saying like, I feel like my ideas aren't correct. Like I feel like there's stuff that I don't know and that I should, and so that I need to like hesitate or do something differently or whatever. But I also think that plays into like, I don't think of myself as almost 40, even though like intellectually I do. So when I evaluate how I feel and how my body feels and like what happens to me after a night where I get 6 hours of interrupted sleep from sick children and whatever,
Yeah.
that part of it is still comparing to like how I would have done 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what is wrong? Because I used to be able to do this. I could go on 6 hours of sleep, no problem. And be like, what's going on with me?
Yeah.
Where really it's just like, you're not updating your mental model of yourself. You're not modifying things that if you stepped away from it and you heard a 20-year-old and a 40-year-old both saying like, we did the same thing, and this is how I feel, and this is how I feel, you'd be like, yeah, of course. But when it's you comparing yourself, it's like, what's going on? Because if after 1.5 years it's still persisting, another possible thing that can be happening is constant re-injury. That like, what we're talking about is the equivalent of somebody just walked until they literally could not walk anymore. Like they didn't stop when they were tired or hungry, or they just kept going until the body collapsed. And then at that point, if you can address it and like get support and help and whatever, you can recover and whatever. But one thing that people will do is they collapse, and then after an hour or 2 hours of rest, they can move again. And as soon as they can move again, they move again. And this time they only get 2 steps before they collapse again. And now they need 4 hours.
I was just going to use that as an example, that this client in particular, I think as their body was systematically breaking down to various degrees, that they would almost come up for air just enough to keep going. And then it kept going like that. And then eventually it was like a total kind of shutdown. So there is like a re-injury in that, right?
That pattern will get things to a much worse state than the alternative, where like you address it a little bit when it's absolutely necessary. Will keep you going down that path longer than if you don't address it at all and just collapse. Especially because you're used to like, no, things have been bad and I can usually just do a little bit and keep going. But there's lots of possibilities. There's possibilities that, no, this is just a medical thing and it has nothing to do with, like nothing would have been any different if you had, because we have a tendency to like, something bad happens to us and we say, how did I cause this? Where sometimes something bad happens and it's nothing you did anything to cause and nothing you could have done anything differently to prevent. So,
I feel like that's the main question that a lot of clients come in with, is how did I cause this? Some version of that.
Well, that's pretty much, sorry, my dad said, you may have inherited that from me, that when will I grow up? He said he asked himself that yesterday. Honestly, really, I think feeling like an adult is not, like you ask people, okay, well, why aren't you an adult? What would make you an adult? And they'll say, you know, I just don't know how to do stuff. And for some reason, they'll always say taxes. Like, I don't even know how to do my taxes. But most people don't do their taxes. The tax preparation industry is a huge industry for a reason.
Usually I refer to that when it's some version of I'm not meeting basic needs.
That's never true, or you'd be dead.
I think there are societal standards of like, this is how you keep your house. This is how healthy you are.
Calling
this
that
is
a basic need is probably part of the issue.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast yesterday about etiquette, and I think it reminds me of that, where they said if you're in a culture that is essentially homogenous, that etiquette can exist because the standards can be communicated without words, but that the United States at this point is so not homogenous. What is it? Heterogeneous? Whatever.
Yeah.
That etiquette can't really exist anymore. And it kind of reminds me of that. Like, to be an adult, this is how one must live one's life. Or else you're not an adult. You're not responsible.
Just as a quick, like, actionable thing for people,
yeah.
This is one of the, like, the most powerful, quick interventions that I have. Stop saying need and stop saying have to.
Yeah, yeah.
If you, even in your own
should count
head,
in that too.
Should as well.
Yeah.
Now, if you're going to use those terms, either in your thoughts or in your word, in your speech, if you're going to use those terms, then you have to attach to it or else, right? I need to blank or else whatever will happen. I need to blank in order to, I have to blank or else whatever. If you don't say the second part of that, then you literally default to thinking, or I will die. And when I say this to people, they're like, no, that's silly. I'm not mistaken.
Oh, I
about
totally
that.
understand that.
But no, you're
You
in
get, like,
panic
a feeling
attacks.
of dread.
Like, your body
Yeah.
is responding as though
Yeah.
you will die. Fight or flight is a thing that's supposed to happen when you are in danger of dying, and it happens to people every day.
All the time.
So change the language to I want to, and we can do a lot about want and the different things. And I'm not saying always want to, it's one option. Or I would benefit from, it would be valuable to, it would be beneficial to, it is important to, et cetera, et cetera. Just stay away from have to, need to, and should.
Yeah.
Because those ones will make you feel like you're dying. Like you just called keeping your house clean a basic need.
Oh, and I don't believe that.
Right. But
yeah,
we do.
that's, yeah.
We talk about it that way.
Yeah, and I once met someone who was so judgmental of things not being, and then the should and the need, and oh my gosh.
And did you tell them
So
that
hard.
a basic need is to not be judgmental of people?
No, I didn't. But they're no longer in my life, so I guess.
Well, these things are not sustainable, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, I got distracted by my dad's comment, and you had said something that I was going to respond to before I got distracted by it.
I don't remember.
I don't either. Oh, you were
It's
saying
coming up for air.
you're saying that people come in saying like, "How did I cause this?"
Oh yeah, I feel like that's, and we talk about it a lot, but sort of the major question of the beginning of therapy for people who are more predisposed to blame themselves.
Well, I think it's everyone in therapy.
Yeah.
I think the popular conception of therapy, including what most therapists think, and therefore what most therapy actually is, rests on the premise that all the things that you're feeling and dealing with are things that you can resolve by changing how you think.
And I think even the therapists who will acknowledge there's a cap to the amount that you can change based off of the environment, they're still estimating way higher.
Sure. And it's not that there's like a cap, although there is. Obviously we're limited. We're finite.
Why
beings.
isn't there a cap? What?
It's not that there's not a cap. There are limits,
Yeah.
but that's not something we could identify.
I think some. Nah.
It's more just about an awareness that like an example of what I'm trying to say is sometimes there will be something that happened that after the fact you can look back and say, oh, if I had just done this other thing, it wouldn't have been a problem. And so there is truth to the idea that exploring it will help me not have it happen again. It's useful to do that, to come up with that. But that gets conflated then with I should have known, or I should have done it differently, or whatever. Where we have a hard time being like, yes, I didn't know that's how it would go. Had I known then what I know now, I would have done things differently. But now that I know, I can do things differently.
Yeah, that sounds a lot less fault.
Yeah. Well, it's like when I say something like I made a mistake or I failed, and people are like, no, you didn't make a mistake. You learned something. Like the idea that making a mistake or failing is somehow a bad
Really
thing
bad.
and you shouldn't acknowledge, which words mean different things to different people. So whatever, how people think of it. But to me, a mistake is I somehow, some way contributed to or allowed to happen something that is not what I wanted.
Yeah.
And I just didn't realize at the time that if I had done something differently, the result would have been more what I wanted.
Yeah, and that sounds a lot less, I don't know, to use the word sinful than.
Yeah. Well, like, because this whole, what I would call toxic positivity, when you're saying like, oh, you didn't make a mistake, you just learned or whatever. Okay, what about when a person trips? Like just stumbles, like physically.
I do think those people might say, sweetie, it wasn't a mistake.
So what would you call it?
I don't know, I'm not those people.
I know, that's what we obviously sometimes, there's something we could have noticed but didn't notice, and therefore we behave in a certain way. You know, like there are times where you're trying to compliment somebody and you offend them. And then after the fact, you can learn and understand and be like, okay, I totally see why that happened and I'll make a change. But you didn't know it at the time. Just because.
I feel like that's something that And I am very biased against social media, and I will admit that. But something that can happen in social media is some version of, you should have known this before saying it.
Yeah.
And I'm really, really mad at you that you said it without knowing.
Yes, people will say that sometimes. It's counterproductive. It doesn't encourage people to learn. It doesn't incentivize people to listen to you or take you seriously. It just makes people afraid of you.
Mm-hmm.
But it also gets you influence and sway with other people, and there are reasons for it. But no, if you're trying to actually get somebody to listen to you and make changes you think that they should make, then generally saying you're a terrible person and you should have already known doesn't make them hear you and change.
Yeah.
It makes them want to interact with you less.
Yeah.
Whereas,
we have 1 minute if we want to be on time.
Thank you, and I do want to be on time today. But anyway, yeah, that to me, that's the popular conception of therapy, is that all of a person's emotional struggles and whatever are their fault.
Yeah.
And not necessarily their fault, because a lot of it, especially when we're talking about trauma and whatever, will be because other people did things to you, but their fault in the sense of because of who you are and how you are constructed.
Ooh.
Right? Like, even though it's not your fault that you are how you are now, the problem you're experiencing is a result of you being how you are. And it sucks that other people made you into that.
Wow.
And then the other premise is that all of it is solvable.
Yeah.
That if you learn how you are causing all these problems for yourself, and again, I'm talking about trauma here too, right? That, like, it's not your fault. Other people did things to you, and it totally makes sense. But if we're calling something a trauma response or a trauma trigger, we're still also saying the way in which you are responding to it is a problem because of how you have been traumatized, and that trying to heal that trauma is to change how you respond to things.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that the way you are, for whatever reason, is at the root of the problems, and that if you can understand how that is and therefore change yourself, then you can solve it so those things don't happen anymore.
Yeah.
So the idea that you only get really sad because you're making some mistake or missing something or thinking about it. You only get really angry because you're having an irrational response to a thing, even though it's reasonable and rational that you're having that response based on traumatic events in the past. It is now, in this moment, irrational because you're just being triggered by something that's not actually happening right now, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what therapy, that's not what life or being human is. Like, you're going to get sad sometimes and tired sometimes and angry sometimes. You are going to trip and fall sometimes. And there are things you can do to make it happen less. And there are things that you can do to make it so that when it does happen, it doesn't hurt you as much, or you recover more quickly. But you can't prevent it all.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, when people come to therapy, I think generally their idea is, well, therapists know how to prevent all emotional problems. They just got to tell me how to do it. That's part of the reason that it's so weird for people sometimes when they're like, oh, my therapist is a human. I don't want that. Like, they have to put their therapists in this, like, lionize, this person has no struggles or difficulty of any kind, because if they did, then how could they help me? Obviously, they don't know either. If you're resting it on the idea that,
yeah, I do think that rarely when people talk about therapy being a really powerful tool, are they acknowledging the humanity of their therapist. But I also think that's changing a bit too.
Yeah, it's definitely
especially
more of a way.
Yeah, with the, like, and this is even showing up in the directories. They'll say something like, share with clients the identities that they might have, and there's some level of, like, I am a therapist with chronic illness, and some version of that actually becomes helpful in establishing
I absolutely
a relationship.
think so. And a lot of what we're talking about has shifted from being about the therapist is perfect to the therapist's ideas or the work. Like, part of the reason there's so much focus on evidence-based work is to say, sure, therapists are flawed and struggle too, but this approach will solve the problem. DBT will solve your problem, even though.
Well, that's a great point, because I know therapists like that have a level of vulnerability that's great and I think helpful, but then some version of, but this is what's going to work.
Right. Well, that's what evidence-based, that's the promise, whether explicit or implicit, of
Yeah.
evidence-based work is we have proof that this will solve your problem.
Yeah.
There's evidence that if you're struggling with X, do this thing and it will get better. Which, there's nothing wrong with doing research and getting evidence, but talking about it like that causes problems because it doesn't always work. And then they think, well, I can't even do this thing right. And
I feel like the preface for the client would be some version of, this sometimes helps people. Are you interested in trying it? Instead
right,
of,
that's what
this
it should
is,
always be.
yeah.
And I do want to say that even the original like Freudian psychoanalysis stuff, which did rely on this model of the therapist knows all,
Mhm.
Freud is not, and all of those, none of them were people, well, I shouldn't say none. The people who were developing this stuff and talking about it, they weren't so arrogant as to think that they were perfect and that's what enabled. But they did Freud structured the nature of his work to allow the client to project onto you that you are perfect.
Mhm.
That you
Yeah.
hide, like there's a reason that they don't have any personal effects in the office and you don't eat or drink. And in Freudian psychoanalysis, you don't even have the client look at you
Mhm.
because they do know that they're not perfect, but they still think that in order for the work to be helpful to the client has to have a perfect conceptualization of
And
you.
I know this sounds kind of spiritual, but it's almost like assuming a godlike status.
I think they would probably say that they're, in that metaphor, being more like the clergy.
Yeah, I don't think they would say that, but it's some, or like, I guess a more spiritualistic term would be an oracle or something. Like you are a human body, but a
You're-
wisdom so divine comes through you as a vessel.
Or that you're allowing them to access something, even if it's not coming through you. You're
Is that
providing
clergy?
them.
That makes sense.
I don't know.
Ish.
We're making this
I'm always
metaphor
a-
up, you and I, right
I'm
now.
always
so.
afraid to mention religion, but I think it's fascinating, and I think it's a topic on many people's minds right now.
Clergy are humans, and they would always say, like, they would acknowledge that they're human and flawed and limited, but they're major, generally that what will be talked about as some version of a calling, that they didn't choose it, it was they needed to do it kind of thing, is to help other people to access and understand
Mm-hmm.
the divine, not be divine. They're not divine.
Mm-hmm.
But that changes
And
when
on
you
that
talk
note,
about like
we're all
prophets
divine.
and popes, and sometimes it crosses over into like, no, I am the prophet.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It was nice being with you, Coach Fritz.
And Best Insider
And
too,
Best
and
Insider.
anyone else that was here. It was nice to be with you.
Yeah.
We've been all over the place. Here's the takeaways. Communicate with people. If you care about people who care about you, they want you to be happy. They want to be able to give you things that you want. Don't make that hard for them. Make it as easy as you want to help them out. Make it as easy as possible for them to give you stuff you want.
Mm-hmm.
Don't make them work hard for it. Just tell them. You want relationships to get better? Communicate more.
Yay.
Yeah. All right.
I really do think that's great. Sometimes when I say things, when I'm genuinely enthusiastic, it sounds sarcastic, but I'm not.
I didn't think you were being
Oh, okay,
sarcastic.
good.
I just didn't have a button to put on it because I would just go on and on about it. Anyway,
Yeah.
we got to get going.
We have buttons.
Good to be with you all. We'll be here same time next week. Hopefully Marie will be feeling better and able to join us. Yeah.
Now Brandon will get up and press the button. Oh no, you don't even have to get up. Okay, bye.
Bye.